Daf Lamed Chesamid base, 5 lines from the top at the 2 dots. Val Hayirakas Aimer. So the Mishnah said on Yerakos, on vegetables, you make a Bore Priya Adama. So in the context of the Mishnah, it mentions Yerakos, and it also mentions that on bread, on pas, you make a maitzi. So we make a comparison, the Gemara is going to make a comparison between the two. Kitani Yerakos, Dumid the pas. So the Mishnah taught Yerakos, and in a similar way, the Yerakos, the state of the vegetables, can be in the same state as the bread. Ma passion or just like the bread, you took the wheat from the ground, and it was transformed, it was changed through the medium of fire, and it made into bread. And the bracha is a maitzi. It doesn't lose its characteristic just because it was transformed by fire. So so therefore we want to say that by vegetables we make an adama not only on raw vegetables but even on cooked vegetables. Even though it was cooked and transformed by the fire, it does not lose its characteristic. It retains its state as yerakos, and therefore you still make a bori priya adama. We learn out from here that cooked vegetables, you make an adoma. It does not lose its characteristic as yerakos just because it's cooked, and you still make an adoma. Dirshu who's Rabbeinu, it's Rav, so Rav said that on cooked vegetables you make an adama. Rabbi Seinu Hayardim Eretz Yisrael Mana Ula Mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan. So Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Omar Shlakos Mevorchan Alem Shahakol Nia Bidvorei. He says no, that Shlakos, cooked vegetables, they do lose their identity through the cooking, and you only make a Shahakol. Vani Omer, and he says that I say, meaning to resolve both of these, and they're not necessarily arguing, is as follows. Anything that initially, if you ate it raw, would be hadama. You'd make an adama. Meaning that this vegetable, the primary state that it's in, the intention for the people when they plant it, what it's normally eaten is in its raw state. If where it's normally eaten, a vegetable that's normally eaten in its raw state, and therefore you'd make an adama, because that's the primary purpose of this vegetable, to be eaten in that manner. Shalkoi, if you cook it, shahakol niya b'dvorei, then the bracha becomes a shahakol. Meaning, what he's saying is that it really depends on the way most people eat this vegetable. If the primary use of this vegetable, it's eaten primarily in a raw state, then the bracha, Chazal will misaken the bracha in the way that it's eaten in its primary state, where it's primarily eaten in its most chashiva state. If people normally eat it raw, that means its chashivas, its importance is primarily when it's raw. So that the bracha, the special bracha that they were misaken, a special bracha they were misaken to give praise to Hashem, is when it's eaten in that state. So therefore, if you cook it, now that becomes the secondary use of the bracha. Then this bracha, secondary use of the fruit, of the vegetable, the bracha was not established for the secondary use, only for the primary, and therefore the bracha is shahakol. But however, if when it's raw, the bracha would be shahakol, meaning that it's generally not eaten raw, it's generally eaten cooked. So therefore, the special bracha that Chazal were misaken was in the cooked state. That's when it has the most chashivas, when the vegetable is the most chashiv. Then sholka bar piyadam. Then if you eat it raw, then that's not in the most chashiv state. It's shahakol. You cook it, you make the bracha is adam. So really, what he's saying is that it's not necessarily an argument. It really depends how it's eaten, generally eaten. And the bracha of adama is when it's in its most chashiv state, when it's most significant, and that's when we give the special praise to Hashem. If it's generally eaten raw, then the bracha raw is adoma and cooked is shahakol. If it's generally eaten cooked, raw is then shahakol, cooked is adoma. Now, as Faisus points out, even though we're making a comparison to pas, it's not necessarily like pas, because pas by bread, the transformation through heat really changes it, li'iluya, makes it much better. From wheat, it becomes bread. But over here, what we're saying is that cooking, you make an adoma, doesn't necessarily have to be better. It's that if it cooks, you can still make an adoma as long as it's generally eaten that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be better, as long as it's generally eaten that way. So we'll see a little bit more on this matter. So the Gemara says, so an example of something which is not generally eaten raw, it's generally eaten cooked, so therefore if it's raw, you make a shahakol, if it's cooked, you make an adoma, we find an example, we find it with cabbages or beet or pumpkins. So those are things that are not generally eaten raw, they're eaten cooked. Eat it raw, it's shahakol, you eat cooked, it's adoma. What's an example of something that's generally eaten raw? And if you eat it raw, it's an adoma. If you cook it, it's only a shahakol. The example is betumi v'kartim. You find it with garlic and leek. And Tosfos asks the question, well, we see that garlic and leek, you eat it when it's cooked. You don't generally eat it when it's raw. It's much better when it's cooked. So Tosfos says, when we cook garlic and leek, we cook it with other ingredients. We cook it with meat. We cook it with other ingredients, with spices. But if it would be simply boiled, then it would be eaten rather raw than cooked. So, therefore, we say on these, this is an example of things that are, some things that are eaten generally cooked and not raw, generally things that are eaten raw and not cooked. Now, what about things that are equal? So Tosfos says, for example, what about apples? Some people eat raw apples and some people eat cooked apples. So Tosfos said things that are equal, then we make a eitz in that case, or in vegetables, on adoma, we make it in both situations. There's not one which is considered the primary and one which is considered only the secondary. In that case, we would make the special bracha in both situations. So Shmuel says, cooked vegetables, you make an adom, v'chaverenu, ayorim eretz Yisrael, umana ula mishmed Rav Yochanan, ula said the name of Rav Yochanan, Omar shalakais, mevarchem alem, shahakol lamidvor. He says, you only say a shahakol. V'ani oimer, and I say, now this is opposed to the approach that we just said, that there's not really necessarily a machloikis. It really depends on the circumstances, how it's generally eaten. But he says, it's a machloikis, and it's a frierdike machloikis, it's a machloikis tanoim. The Tanya yotzim berakik, legabi Pesach, to be yotz from matzah on Pesach, he can be yotz berakik ashori, a wafer that's soaked in water, umavushal shlonimuch, divramer. And even if it is cooked, as long as it's not dissolved. That's what Rameir says. That you can still be yaitz to the mitzvah of matzah. But a wafer which is soaked, you can be yaitz avaloi b'mevushal afal pishal nimuach. But not with cooked matzah, even if it has not been dissolved. So apparently we have a machlokes if by cooking it loses its identity. It seems to me that according to Rameir, as long as it's not dissolved, even though you cook it, the matzah has not lost its identity, but according to Rav Yossi, it does lose its identity. And similarly, the bracha, it would be contingent on the same criteria. Does it lose its identity through cooking or not? And therefore, is the bracha adam or shahakol? The Gemara says, you cannot compare the two cases. The kuli al mishlakas mevarchem alem bari pri adam. Really, I'll tell you that by cooking, it does not lose its identity. And therefore, cooked vegetables, you would make an adama. What's the machlokes legabe matzah? Vad kan leikam Rav Yosi hasam ela mishum debina tam matzah v'leka. The reason he says Rav Yosi that you cannot be yaitse with cooked matzah is not because it loses its identity, it's because it loses its flavor. You have to have the taste of matzah as well, and by cooking it, it loses its taste. But over here, even Rav Yosi would maida that the vegetables do not lose their identity, and you would make an adoma. Cooked vegetables make an adoma. But Rabbi Yomi ben Yefes had a different version of what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rav Chia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said make an adoma, but Rabbi Yomi ben Yefes, he had a different version. He said Rabbi Yochanan says shlokas mevarch lem shakol lebidvara. You only make a shahakol. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak kava ula shabeshta Rabbi Yomi ben Yefes. Ulo that reported in the name of Rav Yochanan that Rav Yochanan said Shahakol, it was ingrained in him the shlit of Rav Yomi ben Yefes, meaning, according to the way some Rishonim learned, is that he didn't hear it directly from Rav Yochanan, he heard it quoted by Rav Yomi ben Yefes, and that's why he reported it that way. But he didn't hear it directly from Rav Yochanan. He wondered, why in the Beis Medrash are we reporting both opinions? Why are we're talking about and bringing the opinion of Rav Yomi ben Yefes if Rav Chia bar Abba reported differently? Rav Chia bar Abba, he was very careful and diligent to be exact in what his Rebbe Rav Yochanan said, so we can rely on his report. But Rav Yomi bar Yefes, he was not so careful, so we can't rely on him if we have Rav Chia bar Abba who says opposite. Rav Chia bar Abba called Lawson Yomi Maharat Talmude Kamed Rav Yochanan. Every 30 days he would chazer his learning in front of Rav Yochanan. In front of Rav Yochanan, Rabbi is Rabbi. Rav Yomi bar Yefes Loy Maharat. But Rav Yochanan did not chazer every 30 days in front of Rav Yochanan. So we can rely more on Rav Yomi ben Yefes. The mashmos of the Gemara is that he chazered everything he learned every 30 days. Taisus amends this. He says it doesn't mean everything he learned. It means whatever he learned within the last 30 days, he chazered it over and in front of Rav Yochanan. Perhaps we have a makor over here that those who have the minig to take a bechina every 30 days and what they learned during the past 30 days. Al kol ponim. In any event, we have a Maisa Shahaya, that there was this bean, the Shmusa bean, that they boiled it 7 times in a pot. It was boiled 7 times. And they ate it for dessert. They brought it for dessert. Also, they asked Rav Yochanan, what's the bracha on it? You see clearly that even if it's boiled, you make an adoma. I saw that he had a salted olive, as Rashi and Taisus point out. It was salted for a period of time, so that the salt now it has a din of that is maliach is keroiseach. That's salted and remain in the heavy salting for a period of time. It's like it's roasted. It's like it's been transformed through heat. And so he had the salted olive, and he made a bracha rishona and a bracha achrona. Now, if you say that the boiling, it still retains its identity, it doesn't lose its identity, so then we understand the bracha tchila v'soif. It still retains its identity as an olive, as a fruit of the tree. Bracha rishon is 8, and bracha achrona is mein sholosh. There we understand, but if you tell me that by boiling it, it loses its identity, so bracha rishona would be shahakal, I would understand. What would be the bracha achrona? You wouldn't make al eitz v'al pri, so what's a bracha achrona? So doesn't that prove that it retains its identity even though it was salted? Gemara says no. No, maybe the bracha achrona is not ala eitz, it's barei nefoshes. So you have no proof. Maybe the bracha rishon was shakol and bracha achrona was barei nefoshes. So we don't have a raya. Moshe from Yitzchak Bar Shmuel, Yirak, Yishadam Yotze Bem Yedei Chavasa BePesach, the vegetables that you can be Yotze, the mitzvah of Morer on Pesach, Yotze Ben Ubakelkshat. You can be Yotze with the leaf and the stalk. Avaloi Kavushim, but not if they're in the state, if they're pickled, V'loi Shlukin, V'loi Muvshalom, and not cooked, not overcooked, and not regular cooking. So cooked vegetables, you cannot be yoitza the mitzvah moror with cooked vegetables. Now, if you're telling me that it still retains its identity even though it was boiled, why can you not be yoitza with boiled vegetables for moror? Moror says no. You can't prove anything from this because shiny hasan to being a tam moror veleka. Perhaps it retains its identity. But similar to what we said before, by matzah, you have to have the taste of the moror. And by boiling it, it will lose its taste. But as far as bracha is concerned, perhaps it still retains its identity and you would make an adoma. So from the fact that you cannot be yoitz the mitzvah moror with it, doesn't prove anything l'gabi bracha, because by moror you need the tam of the moror, the taste of the moror. We said previously that Rabbi Yochanan made a bracha on the salted olive. So we're assuming there was one olive and it was salted, he made the bracha. But he obviously didn't eat the pit. The pit's not edible, so it's the size of an olive. Once you remove the pit, the size of the fruit of what's remaining is less than the size of an olive, of a zayas. So once you remove the pit, you have a less than the size of an olive. You're missing the shiur. And to make the bracha, you have to have a shiur. So how can then he make the bracha? So Tosfos points out, and that this is only when we need, say you need the shiur, that this is only legabi the bracha achroina. The kasha would be on the tzad that the bracha achroina is ala eitz, is me'ein sholosh. The bracha achroina, how can you make the bracha achroina? You're missing a shem bracha rishayna. The first bracha, you would make the bracha even if it's less than a zayis. The more question is the bracha achroina. Now Tosfos has a dion. Is this a consideration only if this is on the bracha, on the tzad that the bracha is me'ein sholosh, was al eitz, or even by boring nefashos, even if you need a shear by boring nefashos as well. And so, but most Rishonim learn, and most Poskim learn, that the shear is a requirement for the bracha achroina, even for boring nefashos. So I'll call upon him. How can he make the bracha? How can he make the bracha achroina? Botzerle shiura. You're missing the shir v'zayis. Amalei misarvus kazayis godel be. And when we say to make a bracha achroina, you need a shir of kazayis. We don't mean a big olive. That's not the shir of kazayis. We don't need a kazayis godel. It's kazayis beinani be'inan. We need a middle size olive. And the olive that they brought for Rabbi Yochanan to eat was zayis godel. But that was a large olive. Even so, therefore, even though they removed the pit, what was remaining was the size of a middle size, a medium olive. So So even though they removed the pit, you still have the shear was still remaining. When they said the shear of kazayas, that measurement, it's not a big one, not a small one, it's the medium one, the middle side. V'zeo aguri. And that's what's called the zayis. It's given the name aguri. It's not really aguri. Rather, the name is avruti. And some say the name is really samrusi. So why was it nicknamed? Why was it given the name aguri? Because the oil is collected inside of it. Meaning, as opposed to other fruit, where the fruit is really part and parcel of the juice rather is really part and parcel of the flesh of the fruit. Over here, by this olive, it's ready to be squeezed out. It's not ingrained that deeply in the flesh of the fruit. It's as if it would be collected inside of it, like collected in a container that's ready to be drawn out of it. As opposed to, let's say, an apple for instance, where the fruit, to get the juice of the apple, you have to squeeze extract it from the flesh itself. You don't really see the difference, the juice and the fruit, the difference between them is not really discernible. Here it's auger b'seichel.